Okay, well, good afternoon, and thank you for coming to the 42nd Annual Festival of Christmas Pants. One of the traditions we have with the festival is storytelling. And we have with us today members of the Smoky Mountains Historical Society and with Mr. Larry Fox. And he's going to introduce his panel. And Mr. Fox, how about doing some storytelling?
Say that again. Doing some what?
Storytelling.
Oh, storytelling.
Yeah.
Don't know if I know his stories or not, but I'll tell you what I can do. I can tell you that the Smoky Mountain Historical Society was organized in 1977. That was the beginning of it. And it is comprised or with interest in the 3 counties adjoining the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, or just simply the Great Smoky Mountains. And we have representatives. We'd like to have each time a representative from each of those 3 counties, but today we're going to double up on Sevier County and then start talking about what it was like way back then. And we got a bunch of old timers here who've got the good memories. But the other side of that same coin is we got the same frailties as old timers anywhere and everywhere. Like right now, we're missing our afternoon nap. But let's begin with this fellow on my right. He is such a good-looking fellow, and he and I have known each other since all the way through grammar school, all the way through high school, and 1 year of college together, and I can't remember your name. What? He can't remember it either.
Jim.
Jim
Schuler.
Jim Schuler is special to me. Like I said, we grew up together, and we went our separate ways and came back together and got together again in the late 70s and the early 80s. And he was telling me about this Smoky Mountain Historical Society. In fact, he said, you would really be interested in that. And he convinced me to come in and replace him as president. And that was back about 1980, 81, somewhere in there, I don't remember. And ever since then, he and I have just kind of varied duties within the Historical Society, and whatever needed to be done, we all just jumped in and did it. And now I am finishing up my final year as president of the Historical Society. I'm going to pass that baton on to somebody else with a younger and better imagination and better incentive and so on and so forth. But in the meantime, Jim, you are from the local county. So let me ask you a couple of questions. First of all, why do they call it Xavier County?
Sevier County.
Isn't that what they call it?
Some do, and some call it other things.
So what do we call it? What is the proper way to say it?
Sevier is originally, I think it was Xavier. It's a French Huguenot word John Sevier's name was. So that's all I know about it.
Okay, John Sevier, that was a person, right? We
Yes.
named it that.
Mhm.
Well, who's he?
John Sevier was the first governor of the state of Tennessee. He was a Revolutionary War veteran and a veteran of Boyd's Creek, I believe.
The Battle of Boyd's Creek, that's true, yeah. And he was good friends with Andy Jackson too, wasn't he?
Not quite. They
Uh-oh.
were bitter enemies.
They were, in fact, bitter enemies. I don't know if you saw it on one of the TV shows, but they were supposed to have a battle one time, a duel. They got so mad at each other, it's going to have a duel. And you remember what happened? You weren't there. You don't.
Supposedly, John Sevier hid behind a tree, but I don't know if he did or not.
Well, that's not the way I
That
heard
might
it.
be a tale just from his enemies, like Marcia says, you know, Marcia. Oh, I shouldn't bring in politics today then.
The story is that the dueling pistols were being brought in by John Sevier on his horse, and the horse ran away, and the dueling pistols went with the horse, so they couldn't have their duel after all. But Jim, about the history, the way it used to be way back when, here in Sevier
Xavier.
County and Sevierville. That's Sevierville. Let me tell you a short story. This couple got off the interstate at exit 407. You know, they're going to come to this area. Well, when they came off the interstate, there is this sign that says, "Welcome to Sevierville." Now, if you have lived here any time at all, you know they can mispronounce. There is just so many different ways that name can be mispronounced. And so the man and wife, they discussed it all the way into the downtown area, and then neither one could convince the other of the proper way to pronounce it. And so they got downtown and decided to stop and get something to eat. So they said, "We'll ask her." So they asked the server, "Would you slowly, carefully enunciate the proper way to pronounce the name of this place?" Now, I'll tell you what, if you grow up here, you just know. You don't have to ask, you just know how to pronounce the name of this place. So she thought about it and she said, "Burger King."
Very good, Larry.
Jim, now you grew up in this county, as we have done, in a place called Walden's Creek. Why do they call it Walden's Creek?
Allegedly, there was a man named David Walden. He lived at the head of Walden's Creek. We call it the head of Walden's Creek. It's the farthest up. And then the county line is our Blount County line. It's real close to the Blount County line where his mountain farm was. And he's buried there somewhere. Nobody knows where right now, but that is where it got its name, as far as I know.
Well, I grew up on Walden's Creek myself, and I never knew who the guy was, anything about him. In fact, I always wondered, why do they call it Walden's Creek? Now, right next to it is a place called, well, it's just a place like paradise. It's called Wares Valley. You familiar with it? Why is it
Yes.
called Wares Valley?
A man named, I believe it was John Ware, was a surveyor up there, and I think, it's my opinion, that he named it for himself. Originally, it was called Crowson's Cove, because Crowson's, it was one of the first settlers of Crowson's, Hatchers, and Piercefield. When Piercefield got murdered, he got massacred by the Indians, and he's buried in Ware's Cove. It's Ware's Cove back then, or Crowson's Cove, and then it became Ware's Cove. Eventually, it became Ware's Valley, but I still call it Ware's Cove.
Mm-hmm. And I did mention a little bit of paradise there. It used to be even more beautiful, didn't it?
Oh yeah, we got to keep it a long time like it was for a long time. I mean, it was beautiful farmland. Now it's being developed, and well, that's nothing we can do about it.
Okay. Now, here you mentioned Crowson's Cove. There was this fellow named Loy Crowson. He was a Revolutionary War veteran. Now, if you remember your own history, when we had these veterans that volunteered and fought for the American nation or freedom from England, well, when it was all over, we owed them a lot of money that we couldn't pay them. In fact, we had a bit of money called the Continental, and there was an expression called not worth a Continental. It was worthless paper. So what the government said to a lot of these veterans was, we can't pay you, but we got plenty of land, and we let you file on this land, and it's yours, it's free. And so we had a lot of Revolutionary War veterans that settled here in Sevier County. Roy Krausen was one. Who others, Jim?
Frederick Emmert was one. That's how Emmert's Cove got its name.
Emmert's Cove. I have an ancestor named Patterson who was also up on the head of Walden's Creek.
There was an Ogle settled on Walden's Creek too, and I don't know if he's a veteran or not.
Speaking of Ogle, why else should that name sound familiar? Like White Oak Flats?
Yeah, White Oak Flats, Gatlinburg.
William Ogle, or Billy Ogle, came over here. He filed on the beautiful piece of property, filed on it, came and lived on it, made friends with the Indians, and started clearing land. So, you want to take it from there?
No, you're doing well.
Yeah, but you're supposed to be doing the talking. Anyhow, Billy Ogle went back to home in South Carolina to get his family, to bring them to this settlement called, it wasn't a settlement, it was a cleared place where he was going to build his cabin, but he needed help to build the cabin and lift those logs. So he's going to bring his family in and build that log cabin. He went back to Edgefield District of South Carolina to get his family, and guess what? He didn't get back here because some kind of epidemic went through, I don't know, cholera, I don't know what it was, but he died. But his wife and their married children, and they decided, hey, it's paradise. He described it as paradise. We're going to go and settle it. So Martha and her married children all came over and settled here in this place, and they called it White Oak Flats. And didn't stay White Oak Flats, did it?
No.
So
Gatlinburg is named for a man that lived here during the Civil War. He was a Confederate, and I don't know if there's any other Confederates or not, but most of the guys that went in the Civil War on the Confederate side from over here went across the mountain to North Carolina. So he was the one that owned the post office building. Was that right?
he was the postmaster, yeah.
So he got that. He made a deal with them. They'd name it Gatlinburg. If I don't know why.
If he would leave.
If he would leave, yeah, okay.
Yeah. Leave town, we'll name it after you.
Yeah, I forgot.
Before the Civil War, they had a referendum, a vote, about whether to secede from the Union or not. And in the place called White Oak Flats, they had exactly one vote to secede. Everybody knew who it was. Get out of town, we'll name it after you.
White Oak Flats. Now, most of you people, I know you're familiar with it, but the cemetery here is called White Oak Flats. That's the only remaining thing that identify that, unless you know somewhere else.
No.
And people are still being buried in it, so that's carry over from the old days, White Oak Flat Cemetery. Okay.
Can you think of any other Revolutionary War soldiers that came in here and settled?
The Duggins.
Duggins, yeah, which is also my ancestors, yeah.
Mhm.
Okay.
Well, there's others, but I can't recall them right at the moment.
How about the Schulers? Where did they come from?
They come across the mountain from North Carolina. They were rebels.
This is after the Civil War?
Yeah.
I didn't know.
They owned Bryson City, and when the war was over, great-great-grandpa divided the land. Some went east, some went west, some went to Franklin, some went to Cades Cove, some went to Sevier County, and that's about it.
Okay. We mentioned Warris Valley being a little bit of paradise there, especially in the olden days before it started being developed. There's another piece of paradise.
Yeah, I come from one of them paradises too.
Say it again.
I came from one of those paradises too.
As a matter of fact, I was going to ask
Yeah,
you about
Camp.
that.
Anybody ever been to Cage Cove? Know where Cage Cove's at? That's where I was born.
Wow.
And raised, and keep going. The floor is yours. Tell them about Cades Cove.
My voice is pretty weak, so I'll get this thing over here. Well, I'll just hold it. I was born in Cage Cove, right across from where the Missionary Baptist Church is at. And if you go by the church and don't turn your wheels left, follow the road, you'd go right out into a field. And the CCC camp was there. And a CC doctor delivered me. And out there in the field, if you've ever been in there, notice there's a round circle of concrete and stones. That's where the flagpole was for the CC camp. We lived there beside of where the CC camp. Mom and grandmother, they used to iron and wash clothes for some of the CC boys. And when I was 8 months, or Mom was 8 months pregnant with me, she helped grandmother lift a tub of water up on the stove about washing. Then I came along. Well, they had a doctor there at the CC camp, and he delivered me. But a month prior to that, when Mom was 7 months pregnant, she had a friend that lived just before you get up to the missionary church. She was going to get married. She needed to go to Maryville for something or other. Wanted Mom to go with her. So at 7 months pregnant, Mom and her walked from there to Maryville. Do you know where Maryville's at? It'd be 20 miles. So pregnant, across the mountain, she's a tough woman. And some of you are local here. Have you ever heard the story of a guy carrying a stove on his back into Maryville, or from Maryville? That was her, yeah, Maryville. That was her granddad, Charlie Garland. Pictures I've seen of Charlie, he's about my size, maybe a little broader shouldered. But he went into Maryville, Crawford and Quayle Hardware, bought a step stove. It's 208 pounds. The step stoves are just, well, about that high, and they got a little oven in the side of them. And they'd use them to heat with and then also to cook. Well, he bought the stove, and they said, Mr. Garland, where's your, well, they give him a cast iron tea kettle. Those things, what, weigh 8 pounds? I wouldn't want to carry just that into the mountains. But they give him one of those tea kettles to put it in the oven, and he bought something else to put in the oven. And they said, Mr. Garland, where's your wagon at? He said, don't have one. We said, how you gonna get it home? I'm gonna carry it. Said, where do you live? Supposedly said Cage Cove, but it wasn't quite in the cove, but it's, I think, about 18 miles. And they said, if you carry that in there without putting it down, we'll give it to you. So he took a piece of rope, made a sling, and got that thing on his back, and they sent a fellow with him. And every once in a while he'd stop and lean up against a tree, but he never did set it down. Are any of you acquainted with the Heartland series that used to come on TV? They did a reenactment of that. I think it's number 28 on the film of Enid Anderson Lumber Company. A friend of mine worked in there in the shop, and they built one out of wood, painted black to where it would look like a metal stove, where it's light enough for that fella to carry it for the film. But he took that thing into to his home. My granddad, Jake Garland, whenever he was around 20-year-old, he was a big guy, weighed over 200 pounds. He said he was aggravating his dad there one day, kind of scuffling with him. And Charlie said, "Now leave me alone, I don't want to have to hurt you." He said, "Oh man, I can ride you." He said, before I knew what happened, he said he picked me up and had me rubbing me against the ceiling, my stomach raw. So I don't know why he was so stout, but he's a stout guy. Now, I was born in Cage Cove. I'm kin to a bunch of people up there. Are you acquainted with the Becky Cable House? Yeah. John B. Cable was my great-great-granddad. Becky is a great aunt. That house used to set up there along the road, and they moved it down there next to the mill. If you're back up there again, look at the middle room, the floor. There's a fellow named Perry Cable. He was a nephew of Becky's. And I was told he's dropped on his head when he's a baby and jumbled his brain up, and he never did learn to talk. And it'd been about 1940, I guess. He was around 50-year-old, I think, but he just walking in circles in the yard wearing a dress. Little kids, whenever they're little, they've got them little gowns. When it come time for him to wear overalls, he didn't want nothing to do with them. He wanted his dress, when it worked out better. But I remember him just walking around in circles. Well, that middle room was his. He didn't know enough to be housebroke. So there's holes bored in that floor, about 1.5 inch hole. And they would take buckets of water and a broom and sweep that mess where he had messed. That was the first indoor bathroom, I guess. Some years ago, I belonged to the Cage Cove Preservation Group. There's a museum out at Maryville, and everything in there pertains to Cage Cove. And a girl that was the president at that time, she wanted me to talk up there. There was a bunch of them getting together at the missionary church. So she talked me into it. So I got up and I told him, I said, I was born across the road here. My granddad died in 24, but he used to have a store in the post office there. And I've got an old ledger, 1908, whenever he was doing business there in the store. People bringing in furs, ginseng, eggs, chickens, just whatever they had. The mom was talking about, there's a different store, but whenever she was going to school, that if she needed a pencil or a tablet, she'd go by the barn, get her an egg, and take it to the store and get her pencil or her notepad or whatever she needed. But in that, it's interesting just to look, see how, there was not much money passed hands then, it was barter. So I was telling him about that, and he's also a preacher. He had some sermons wrote down in the back. One of them, he's talking about the fast times he's living in. So I told him, I said, I believe if he'd raise up and look around now, that he'd just lay back down. But he was a preacher. Well, I told him, I said, well, both of my granddads dealt with the Spirit. I said, this one over here, he dealt with the Holy Spirit. My other granddad was up on the side of the mountain making spirits. So I had, there's big variation there in my granddaddies. My dad, he worked in logging camps and lived there across the missionary church. Well, he would walk across the cove, over the mountain, down into North Carolina to Yellow Creek, Panther Creek, I forget what it was. Anyway, that was a long walk. And he'd stay there in the camp all week, and then on the weekend he'd come back home then. That there's a lot of Myerses in there. They were the predominant group there at one time, and in that section where the CCC camp was at, that area from on over to about the Elijah Oliver house, that section through there, they called it Myerstown. There's so many of the Myerses. Because I'm kin to the Gregories. In the Primitives cemetery, you may have seen it, where Russell Gregory was killed by North Carolina rebels. That was third great-granddad, maybe fourth, I forgot. Third or fourth great-granddad. And up on the mountain, this place called Gregory's Ball, the other is Russell Field, Spence Field. And the people there in the cove, they used to take their cattle up there. There'd be a couple of guys, they had a cabin up there, and they'd stay there and watch the cattle. They'd take a log and cut out notches in it and put salt in it, have a salt lick. So the cattle, they weren't fenced up there. They had a section up there, they called it the gate lock, where that they would put cattle in whenever an owner was going to come up and get his cattle, where they'd start rounding them up. But the cattle wouldn't go far because they'd want to come back and get that salt. But anyway, the people there in the cove in the spring, they'd take their cattle up there and leave them over the summer till fall, cattle they were going to sell or for beef. Of course, they kept their dairy, or their milk cows down there in the cove. But they would, when they took their cattle up there, that freed up ground to where they could put up hay off of, maybe get an early crop off of it, because it's limited in their ground there. There's at one time there was 730 some people, I think it was, lived there in that cove. There's a lot more of it was cleared. If it was halfway flat, you can be sure that was cleared ground. It's farming it. Any of you ever camp? B section up there, Dad's plowed corn in there. That was a cornfield. There was another guy, Myers, that lived down there about where the store and ranger station's at. So he was plowing there to make a little money off of that. But there's little hollers and things that in there that cleared people lived in. And the people were, some of them getting hard for them to make a living. And they were ready to come out, but some of them were heartbroken to have to come out. I heard a story about one guy, he was too old to carry out his plans, but he was heartsick and he was going to have to move out. So his plan was he got candles and he'd see how much it burned down in 30 minutes or an hour, I forget which it was. And then, so his plan was to get a full one, cut the next one down, different lengths where they staged about either 30 minutes or a half an hour apart. So his idea was to set the candles, the longest one first, walk that 30 minutes or hour, set out another one. Then it's all going to burn down at the same time. He's going to set a fire from one end of that mountain to the other. He's going to burn that thing down and start taking that property away. My cousin married a fellow, Hugh Myers. Hugh and my cousin, they had the riding stable up there from the 70s until, I don't know, 10 or 12 years ago, they lost the lease. But she was talking about that family farm was right beside of where my grandmother and granddad's farm was at. So she said there's one field ahead, it's about a half a mile long. He would take 2 horses to the field. He'd plow one down and back, so that's about a mile. He'd change horses. He'd do that 28 times during the day, 28 miles. Now, he had stretched the day out to 28, plow a horse 28 miles. Yeah,
By the way, you never did tell them who you were, so I will. This is Leon Myers, and when I heard that he was going to come from Blount County to speak for us today, I knew, oh boy, Cades Cove, Paradise, he's not going to have any problem at all talking about a beautiful, beautiful place. And sure enough, Leo, you've done that very thing. Now, we got another fellow over here on the left who is not even homegrown. He came from South
I
Carolina.
ain't from around these parts.
He came from South Carolina, and when he got here, he fell in love with the place, and I asked him, so, well, you're not like they accuse us of being marrying the girl from the next holler over because you never got further away. He says, no, I married the Smokies. And there's one particular fellow and one particular family that he has kind of been, I'm trying to find a good verb for it,
Obsessed?
obsessed with. Anyhow, this is Lou Bolton, and Lou has kind of fallen in love with Wiley Oakley and the Wiley Oakley family. Now, how many of you have heard of Wiley Oakley? Wow, looks good. Okay, Lou, go ahead. You've got a story to tell about Wiley Oakley.
Well, I have lots of things, but this is a picture of Wiley and his wife, Rebecca Ann Ogle. Rebecca Ann, I don't know if you have been up if you leave Gatlinburg on Airport Road and you drive by Minot Park and you go that loop road, the first cabin on the right, the Noah Bud Ogle cabin, that was her daddy. Rebecca was born there, and that's where she first saw Wiley walking along the road, carrying some of the game that he had killed. And they finally got married when she was about 14 or 15, and he was around 20. And they moved to a place called Scratch Britches Mountain. And at Scratch Britches Mountain, it was at the foot of Mount LeConte, and they raised a family there. They had 12 children eventually. This is their first child. This is Wilbur?
Was it Woodrow?
No, I think it was Woodrow. I think it was Wilbur, if I'm remembering right. And so they lived in that house, and they had some Christmas customs. And since this is a Christmas event, I thought I would tell you a few things that the Wiley Oakley family did in regard to Christmas. Lucinda Oakley was their daughter. You may have heard her also. She wrote a book. Wiley wrote a book. Wiley's son, Harvey Oakley, also wrote several books and collected some of Wiley's writings. And so I have gathered some of the things from those sources, plus an audio tape that was made in 1954 with Wiley and Rebecca actually speaking on it. But on that CD recording, the interviewer asked Ms. Oakley, what did you do for Christmas? And we find out that they had a Christmas tree. Lucinda said every year, no matter where they lived, whether it was a small cabin or a large cabin, whether it was in the mountains or whether it was in Gatlinburg, they always had a Christmas tree. And of course, they had lots of choices back then. They didn't have to go to Walmart or somewhere to buy trees the way we do these days, or a vendor on the streets, but there were lots of trees there. And the interviewer asked how it was decorated. She said, well, it was decorated with paper. She didn't explain exactly what she meant. I doubt if they had construction paper the way they did later on. Maybe she meant newspaper that they would cut shapes out of, stars, sheep, whatever to put on the tree. She said they also strung holly berries, the berries from holly tree and other trees, and that was a part of their decorating. Now Lucinda attended Pi Beta Phi school later on, but she told about a time when she went to the school on Mill Creek. Mill Creek is the creek that runs by Minot Park. It's now called LeConte Creek. There was a school there, and she said it was the prettiest Christmas tree she ever saw. They made construction paper rings to ring around the tree, red and white. They strung popcorn, so I'm sure that was probably a tradition over a lot of the Smoky Mountains. And she said they had these little bells that they would somehow or another fix, hang with strings, and whenever the breeze came along, it would ring these bells, and it was the prettiest sound. And under that tree, they had brown paper pokes or bags. And in the bags, they would have an apple, an orange, and maybe a little bit of peppermint candy, or horehound candy, or a special mix of candy that the local merchant would mix up. And they were able to take that home with them, and that was their Christmas at the time. But in the family itself, it was probably a little poorer, especially in the beginning. Lucinda talks about a custom that I think is sort of interesting to hear about, called Christmas gift. She said that at the crack of dawn, on Christmas Day, she and her brothers and sisters, she was the oldest daughter in the family, that they would rush to their Aunt Lindy Ogle's home. And they had a custom that whoever said first to the other, Christmas gift, the other was supposed to give that person Christmas gift. So she said the kids were always excited and they were rushing to Aunt Lindy's house. She described Aunt Lindy as a large woman, 5 by 5, she said. But she was a jolly, sweet old woman, and she loved her dearly. And Aunt Lindy said later that she would always let the kids call out Christmas gift first because she just loved seeing the smiles and the happiness on their faces. So what the Christmas gifts would be normally was sweet bread, she called it. She would bake up this sweet bread sprinkled with home ground nutmeg, and it was sort of like on a sweet biscuit. And Lucinda says it was the best sweet bread. She made the best in the whole everywhere. And then after they had had that, their Aunt Lindy would give them a little something like an orange or an apple or a little piece of a candy. And then the kids, and they would wish each other Merry Christmas, and then the kids would rush back to their cabin in the woods. And then they would have a very special breakfast. Now, normally they would not be able to afford such a breakfast, but they would have country cured ham. And biscuits and gravy. And that was their special treat on Christmas Eve, to have those kind of foods. So it was a happy time for them, even though they were poor. And Lucinda says that in comparison to today's families and the children who have a room full of toys, that the simple things that they got back then made them just as happy as any kid could be today. So those were a few of the customs. Mrs. Oakley also said that she baked gingerbread for Christmas. The gingerbread men, the gingerbread women. And I started thinking about that. My relations in South Carolina talked about their mother baking gingerbread. So I'm assuming ginger was easily found in the Smokies, because it seems to be a staple of cooking back then. But she would make these gingerbread men and women. And Wiley, being a little bit of a tricky feller himself, or a fun-loving feller, would sometimes bite off the heads of the gingerbread cookies, and the girls would just cry, "Oh, you bit off the heads of the gingerbread men and women. Now you got to eat the whole cookie." But they had many other cookies after that. Wiley and his family exchanged gifts also. If one child had something that another child liked, they would often swap or exchange or barter at Christmas to get the thing that they wanted, because they couldn't buy anything new from Walmart or order it from Amazon. They would also make homemade items. They would make things like flutes out of elderberry wood. They would make little wagons called bulgur wagons. And these wagons had wheels, and the wheels were made out of a circular cross-section of the black gum tree. And they would also make sleds. So, as simple as it was, they did have Christmas, and they celebrated it in their own way back then. Wiley, by the way, was born about 85 and died in 54. So the family had Christmas, and I don't know if there's anything else I wanted to tell you about the Christmas, but I wanted to say that Wiley wrote a book, as I said. He also wrote articles for the local Knoxville paper. And I have a few items from that paper, depending on how much time we have now, to share some of his thoughts around Christmas. What time
We've got
is
about
it?
3 minutes.
About 3
You're gonna
minutes.
read
Well,
that poem,
I
too.
will just read the poem then. But he would write things about Christmas and say things like, Christmas will soon come again, not long till 1948. This was 70 years ago. It won't be here anymore, but from now on, 49 comes in and everybody should be happy. So I like it, don't you? Turkey, chicken, pie. Just why should anybody cry? Well, I don't have that turkey or chicken either, but I'm still in hopes. And he said many other things that I will skip over. And I'll skip to a little Christmas thought that might be a good thing to end with our part of the program today. He wrote, may all the bells on Christmas Day a song of happiness convey, and all the voices ringing clear bring joy on earth and Christmas cheer. And may all the little children's dreams come true, and their hearts be full of joy and happiness the whole year through. I love you too, and may many good things come your way that will cheer you up and make you happy on Christmas Day. May you be so full of joy that the heavens will bow down to meet that soul of yours. But don't forget who was born on Christmas morn. Oh yes, it was the Prince of Peace and Hope that was born. May all the bells on Christmas Day ring a song of happiness that will bring peace and joy to every soul on earth. And that's a little wish for you too. Thank
Okay.
you.
Lou Bolton, Leon Myers, Jim Schuler, and I'm Larry Fox, and we all wish you a very Merry Christmas.
Very merry. And a Happy New Year.
Always good to hear about the ancestors and the people who live in this area. They're very special, very hearty, wonderful people. Thank you so much. Our next session is going to start in just a couple of minutes. We hope you join. We're going to have our park staff and some other people come in, and we're going to end up with a little bit of carol singing. And that'll be in just a couple of minutes. Very well done. Very nice. Thank you. Thank you, sir. Absolutely. Enjoy it. Thank you.
I guess you know about why we find.
Yes.
I was reading through it. I was remembering for the word hold, you wrote H-O-L-E.
Yes.
You didn't have much education, so you had to sort of sound out what you were saying. It is, it's in, wait a minute. It's in a book that I don't know its name. It's in Harvey Oakley's book called Remembering the Roman man of the Smoky Mountains. That's what it's called. Remembering the Roman man of the mountain. I'll show you a picture of it. This is it. They used to have it in the bookstore, but the only book they have now, that I know of, they do have that. This is the book by him that his son put together. This is where the poem is.
Kind of wet.
I don't know.
You take a picture of it, I wouldn't go on me.
Yeah.
Just let me know
Instead of
right
remembrance, just.
That's right.
And then this is my son.
That's baby son. You know, the stuff you get, grandparents, stuff, Tim. Oh, it sounds so good.
That's Wiley Open, that's a famous postcard.
You have a good day and a good trip.
Would you like to take a picture of it? Because I have a large piece. Did you get your picture? Yes. I do. It's a jacket. It's a Smoky Mountain jacket.
Okay. Our carolers went home.
They did.
Well, our carolers went home, so
32 years.
thank you for coming. We appreciate you all being
But I
here.
was getting worried
It's a
about
family
the
camping.
Yeah, I don't blame you at all.
So I invite the kids and other people to be here.
I'm so ready to get back out that way
From where?
from all the traffic.
Oh.
I'm 57 years old, I had to go around the mill all my life. But the traffic, I'm ready to get back that way. I'm ready to get back to the nature part of it, you know, because it's so busy out there.
It is. You have to come in off seasons to have any kind of privacy.
But there's not no off-season, that's just it. There's not no off-season.
Not anymore. There used to be, but these days it's year round.
And what campground?
Adventure bound
Adventure Lane.
Bill, thank you so much as usual. Thank you, Al. I
You go online.
really appreciate what you do.
Jack Tales Storytelling Theater of the Smoky Mountains.
You kind of got,
Jack Tales Storytelling.
you know,
This is the most interesting couple years.